Tax IDs. You'd think this is something pretty simple. Do we really need to cover it? But unfortunately, it can be devastating if little errors are made, and we'll talk about how to avoid those errors. Now, the goal is to avoid personal liability for business obligations, avoid tax consequences, penalties, and fines, and keep all of your business operations separate from your own. But let me tell you a real story that happened and the devastating consequences that resulted. A business owner set up a PayPal account, and it was a little confusing how to set this up. The business owner's intent was to set up a business account in order to receive payments from customers for the business. Now, like most banking institutions, PayPal asked for a social security number for the business owner. Now, PayPal might have also requested a tax ID for the business, but it was a little confusing, and the business owner didn't quite know which type of account do I set this up. Do I set it up as a business owner under the name of the business, or do I set it up as a business entity under the name of the owner? And so because it was confusing, the business owner ended up providing information for himself and the corporation. And then in the years that followed, the corporation's customers paid money to this PayPal account. Hundreds of thousands of dollars went into this account. And then there was a lawsuit. And long story short, it was not clear under PayPal's records whether the account was owned by the individual, the owner, or the corporation. And this happens time and time again, where a creditor will go after the assets of a bank account or a PayPal account where there's a tax ID number associated with the account. And it's not clear whether that tax ID number is the owner or just one of the authorized signers or the person who set up the account. So the big takeaway here is understanding that a social security number is a tax ID number for an individual. Corporations, LLCs, and other business types get their own tax ID number. That's called an EIN, which stands for Employer Identification Number. And as a business owner, company president, or COO, it's really important whenever you set up an account with PayPal, Venmo, a credit card company, or a financial institution, make sure you're using the right tax ID. So that the right ID is making sure that the owner is clarified. Is it the company or is it you as an individual? By the way, I've even seen this with credit cards, where the intention was to set up a credit card for a company. The COO set the credit card account up, and the credit card company opened the account under the name of the COO and allowed the business to use the card. What was the problem? When the business went under and didn't pay the credit card account, the credit card company came after the COO and said, this is your personal account. You are personally liable. So tax ID numbers are vital because you want to be really clear who's the owner of the account. And if your tax ID number personally, your social security, is associated with the account, you want to be really clear about where does your personal liability end. Usually you're personally liable for whatever you do, but you don't want to be liable for whatever happens to the account. Only the owner of the account should be liable for whatever happens to the account. What's the takeaway here? Make sure you clearly understand the difference between your social security number and the EIN, which is the tax ID for your company. And whenever you're filling out forms, be really clear about which tax ID owns the account or is responsible for the account, and who are the other people who are signers. A lot of times this gets into a lot of legalese, and it's not real clear from the forms that are filled out. So this is a great opportunity to involve an attorney if you're not sure. It's never a problem right in the beginning. What happens is years go by, and then all of a sudden there's a dispute, or the IRS freezes funds in the account. Imagine running your company and the IRS freezes your company account because your secretary from years earlier set up the account in her name, and it wasn't the company as the owner. So the company has $100,000 in the account, and when the secretary doesn't pay her income taxes, the IRS comes and freezes the money in your company account. Why? Because the account is under her Social Security number, not listed as the company being the owner. I've seen these issues time and again, and so the takeaway is make sure you're using the right tax ID number and clarifying who's the owner, who is the signer, who has access to these accounts, so liability is properly allocated to the individual or entity you want it to go to. Let's quickly talk about the different names and types of tax IDs and how to get them. The government issues tax ID numbers for people. These are called Social Security numbers if you're a citizen of the United States. And if you don't qualify for a Social Security number, for example, because you're not a citizen of the United States, then you can get an individual tax ID number. Both of those are issued by the federal government through the IRS or a similar government branch. Businesses also have a tax ID number. Those are called Employer Identification Numbers, or EIN. It's called that even if the company is not employing anyone. In fact, EINs are actually used for other entity types like a trust, even if it's not a business, and so it wouldn't have employees. So EIN is just a term used for a tax ID number that's created for a non-individual, so like an LLC, corporation, etc. The IRS provides EIN numbers. So in order to get an EIN, it's very simple, it's free, and it's immediate. You go onto the IRS website, you can go to the page that allows you to get an EIN, you fill out the information, and it's immediately given to you, even before anybody reviews your information. The IRS computer issues you an EIN. Once you get that EIN for your company, you generally also need to get a state tax ID number. Common names include state tax ID number, state taxpayer number, state sales tax number, and state corporation number. Different states have different names, but they all serve the same purpose. It's kind of like a Social Security number for your company. It's a number that's used to track your company in that state. And you're generally going to use that tax ID number whenever your company does a state tax return. That includes sales tax, use tax, income tax, and any other tax. One important part of that is often payroll tax, because whenever you are withholding money from employees' wages, you are going to notify the state and use your state tax ID number. So every company has a federal tax ID number and a state tax ID number. Every individual has a federal tax ID number, and for citizens, that's called the Social Security number. So what are some common mistakes? The big one is using the wrong tax ID number on a form or when setting up an account. The second mistake is not getting a tax ID number, not getting a business registered with the state. The other mistake I often see is a company will have more than one EIN number. Every company should have one. If you add a DBA, You don't get a new EIN. The EIN is for your relationship with the IRS and the federal government. So when your company has an EIN with the federal government, it doesn't matter if you set up multiple DBAs. You still just use one EIN number. And if you start another LLC or another corporation, each one has its own EIN number. So what's the key takeaway here? Well, now that you understand the different types of tax IDs, just make sure that you use the right tax ID number for each situation.